Welcome to the entire history of Easter eggs and main quests inside of Treyarch's Call of Duty Zombies modes. All the way from its inception in World at War, into the Dark Aether saga, to present day with Black Ops 7 Zombies. Let's begin. Today, the Easter egg, or main quest, is inseparable from Call of Duty Zombies. New maps are judged by the quality of their quest, the strength of their boss fight, and how satisfying the ending feels. No! 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 Entire communities organise around solving them. Streamers race to be first. Developers design maps with the assumption that players will tear every inch apart, searching for hidden meanings. But that relationship between the players and the Zombies content did not exist at the start. In fact, Zombies was never meant to support something like this at all. When the mode first appeared, it was a bonus, a surprise unlocked after completing the World at War campaign, an Easter egg in of itself. There was no long-term plan, no overarching narrative bible, and certainly no intention for Zombies to become a puzzle-driven, story-focused experience. It was a simple survival mode, built quickly by a small team who were experimenting more than they were planning. And yet, hidden inside that simplicity was the seed of everything that came after. To truly understand the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs, you have to stop thinking about them as quests right away, because early on, they were not quests. They were curiosities. Small, optional secrets placed into a mode that did not slow down, did not explain itself, and did not care whether you found them or not. That contrast is the key to why Zombies' Easter eggs worked when they could have just as easily failed. And nowhere is that clearer than in its genesis, NACHT UNTOTEN. NACHT UNTOTEN is as close to a blank slate as Zombies ever gets. There are no named characters, no Perca-Colas, no Pack-a-Punch, no objectives beyond survival. The map itself is tiny, almost claustrophobic, with just enough space to kite zombies and not enough space to ever feel safe. The entire experience is built around repetition. Kill zombies, rebuild barriers, accumulate points, die, repeat. It is intentionally bare bones, and that simplicity is why the hidden elements stand out so strongly. Scattered around the map are several red barrels. They do not glow. They are not highlighted. They do not draw attention to themselves in any meaningful way. But if a player shoots all of them, something unexpected happens. Music begins to play. There is no message on screen, no audio cue telling you what you did. The game does not acknowledge your success in any traditional way. It simply changes the atmosphere. The match feels different now, more alive, less repetitive. There is also a radio that can be shot to trigger additional tracks from the game. Again, no explanation, no hint, just an interaction that exists quietly, waiting for someone to stumble into it. On paper, these are tiny additions. They do not affect gameplay balance, they do not make survival easier, they do not advance any story. But they establish a design philosophy that Zombies would lean on for the next decade. The game contains secrets that exist entirely outside of the core loop, and more importantly, it never tells you they are there. At the time, Easter eggs were not new to games. Developers had been hiding jokes, references and secrets for years. Even World at War's campaign included an Easter egg that let players unlock the ray gun. What made Zombies different was the environment that these secrets were placed into. Zombies is loud, chaotic, relentless. The mode actively punishes hesitation. Standing still gets you killed. Wandering aimlessly gets you trapped. The game trains you to focus on survival above all else. And yet, NACHT UNTOTEN asks you to notice details anyways. It asks you to shoot objects that do not matter, to experiment, to break from the optimal survival mindset just long enough to discover something optional. That tension between urgency and curiosity becomes the defining trait of Zombies' Easter eggs. Finding a secret in Zombies never feels safe. It feels earned. What is especially important here is that none of this was framed as a quest. There was no beginning or end, no sense of completion, no narrative context. These secrets existed purely as rewards for engagement. They were there for players who stayed long enough, played enough matches, and paid enough attention to their surroundings. Looking back, it is easy to treat NACHT UNTOTEN's Easter eggs as primitive or insignificant by modern-day comparisons, but in many ways, they are the purest expression of what Zombies' secrets were meant to be. Optional, hidden, unexplained. The player was never meant to feel guided, and that idea would shape everything that followed. In the next maps, Treyarch would begin to experiment with structure. They would add patterns, atmosphere, and eventually story implications. But the core rules established in NACHT never went away. Zombies' Easter eggs would never announce themselves. They would always require players to look where the game told them not to look, in a mode that never stopped trying to kill them. And that philosophy carries us directly into VERRUCKT, where those small secrets begin to feel darker, more deliberate, and more unsettling.
Great! Power's out!
VERRUCKT is where Zombies' Easter eggs begin to feel intentional rather than incidental. NACHT established the idea that secrets could exist quietly inside of the mode, but VERRUCKT starts to formalize how these secrets work and what purpose they serve. The musical Easter egg returns, but this time it follows a recognizable structure. 3 toilet seats must be activated to trigger the song. That detail matters because it introduces pattern recognition as part of discovery. Players are no longer stumbling into a single hidden interaction. They are being taught subtly that one strange object might imply the existence of others like it. This simple repetition becomes the foundation for almost every Zombies Easter egg that follows, where discovery leads to suspicion, and suspicion leads to experimentation. At the same time, VERRUCKT introduces something arguably more important than structure, which is intent. The dentist chair Easter egg is small and easy to overlook, but it represents a major shift in philosophy. Activating it produces nothing useful. There is no weapon, no power boost, no score bonus. Instead, the map fills with the sounds of drilling and screaming, implying horrific medical experimentation carried out in this space before the outbreak. This moment exists purely to make the environment feel wrong. It gives the location a history that players were never meant to witness directly. For the first time, Easter eggs are being used to imply story rather than just reward behavior. Zombies is no longer just a place where something bad is happening. It is a place where something bad already happened. What makes this especially effective is how vague it all still is. VERRUCKT never explains who was experimented on, who conducted the experiments, or why they happened. There is no named villain, no defined organization. The lack of clarity is part of the design. These secrets do not exist to inform the player, they exist to unsettle them. Easter eggs at this stage are not telling a story so much as they are planting questions, and that sense of unease becomes one of the defining emotional tones of Zombies moving forward. Shi No Numa builds directly on this idea, but shifts the focus from environment to character. This is the map that introduces the original crew, and with them, the first real sense that Zombies has protagonists rather than just avatars. Each character has a distinct voice, personality, and presence, and that alone changes how Easter eggs are perceived.
Does that turn you on?
Secrets are no longer just tied to locations, they are tied to people. Hidden inside of one of the huts is Richtofen's journal. Interacting with it triggers a distorted, almost gleeful laugh that echoes across the swamp. Mechanically, this is still a very simple Easter egg. There are no steps to follow, no follow-up reward, and no clear explanation of what the journal contains. But narratively, it is a massive step forward. This moment implies that Richtofen has been here before, that he left something behind, and that whatever he is involved in has already begun to affect his sanity for the first time. An Easter egg hints at motive. What is important here is restraint. Shi No Numa does not explain Richtofen's plan. It does not frame him as a villain or a hero. It simply gives the player enough information to realise that this character knows more than he lets on, and we should be suspicious. Looking back, this journal becomes one of the earliest breadcrumbs leaning towards the Aether storyline as we understand it today. At the time, it functioned as a mystery with no solution. Players could sense that it mattered, even if they had no way of knowing why. Together, VERRUCKT and Shi No Numa represent a transitional phase in Zombies Easter eggs. They are no longer purely novelty secrets like the music in NACHT UNTOTEN, but they are also not yet quests. There is no progression, no escalation, and no sense of completion. Instead, these Easter eggs exist to enrich the world. They give locations a past and characters a future. They encourage players to read into details, to speculate, and to talk to each other outside of the game. This is also where the community aspect of Zombies begins to take shape. Because these secrets do not explain themselves, discussion becomes part of the experience. Players compare notes, share theories, and try to piece together meaning from fragments. Trick is not telling a story directly, they are letting players assemble one themselves, even if that story is incomplete. By the end of Shi No Numa, Zombies Easter eggs have evolved from hidden distractions into narrative tools. They still do not guide the player, and they still do not reward mystery, but they have acquired purpose. They're setting the stage for something larger. The next map would take that foundation and push it further, transforming implication into revelation, and laying the groundwork for would eventually become the first true Zombies quest, and that brings us to RIESE.
Power levels critical.
Power's out. Let's get turned back on.
RIESE is the moment where Zombies Easter eggs stop feeling abstract and start feeling deliberate. Everything before this map laid groundwork, but RIESE is where Treyarch clearly realizes the potential of what they have been building. This is the map where implication turns into confirmation, where atmosphere gives way to narrative, and where Easter eggs begin to resemble something closer to a quest, even if they are not quite there yet. By the time players reach RIESE, they are already conditioned to expect secrets. They know to shoot strange objects, to listen for audio cues, to question why certain things exist in the environment. RIESE rewards that mindset by hiding its Easter eggs behind a sense of progression. You do not stumble into it early. You must first engage with the map, open it up, and unlock Pack-a-Punch. Only after completing what feels like the map's natural endpoint does the game quietly suggest that there is more. Outside of the facility, players can shoot a glowing light near a Stonehenge structure. Doing so activates what would later become known as the Flytrap Easter egg. From here, the map turns into a game of hide and seek. Small objects around the map hide themselves, and players must find and shoot them while the demonic announcer reacts in-game. Once all of them are found, she declares victory with the now iconic line. On the surface, this Easter egg is almost anticlimactic. There is no weapon reward, no power boost, no permanent unlock. But the importance of the Flytrap has nothing to do with what you gain and everything to do with what it confirms. The demonic announcer has become more than an abstract voice. She is aware of you, she is playing with you, and she reacts when you complete her game. This realization becomes far more disturbing when paired with the radios hidden throughout RIESE. These audio audio logs tell the story that previous maps only hinted at. Through audio recordings, players learn about Richtofen's betrayal of Ludwig Maxis, the murder of his daughter Samantha, and the death of her dog Fluffy. The implication snaps into focus. Samantha's soul is bound to the ether. She is the announcer. She is controlling the zombies. For the first time, Zombies Easter eggs deliver a coherent narrative revelation, rather than just fragmented suggestions. The story is still hidden, still optional, and still never explained outright by the game, but it is now unmistakably there. Players are no longer theorizing blindly, they are uncovering facts. RIESE also establishes a critical structural idea that would shape future quests. Easter eggs do not interrupt the core gameplay loop, they sit beyond it. You survive, you progress, you master the map, and only then are you invited to look deeper. This reinforces the idea that Easter eggs are for invested players. They are not tutorials or onboarding tools, they are layers added on top of mastery. Another subtle but important shift happens here. The Flytrap Easter egg introduces interaction with the announcer as part of gameplay. This is the first time a Zombies Easter egg feels like a conversation rather than a one-sided discovery. The map acknowledges your actions, it responds. That feedback loop becomes essential to how future quests communicate progress. RIESE is also where the community truly begins to understand that Zombies has an ongoing storyline worth following. The radios are cryptic, but they are concrete. They name characters, they describe events, they establish cause and effect. From this point forward, Easter eggs are no longer just fun secrets to show friends, they are primary sources of narrative information. In hindsight, RIESE feels like the prototype for everything that follows. It introduces step-based progression, narrative payoff, environmental storytelling, and direct interaction with a guiding presence. It does all of this without calling itself a quest, and without ever placing a marker on the player's screen.
I miss my wife.
Hi guys, Mr. Ruffalo.
This balance between subtlety and significance is why RIESE stands out so strongly in the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs. It proves that secrets can carry story weight without sacrificing mystery. It shows that players are willing to work for answers, and most importantly, it demonstrates that Zombies is capable of telling a story entirely through hidden content. With RIESE, Trek crossed an invisible line. Easter eggs were no longer experiments. They were now an essential storytelling tool. The next step was inevitable. If secrets could carry this much meaning, what would happen if they were given more space, more steps, and more structure? That question would be answered soon.
Maybe someone should go turn on the power now!
KINO Toten is an unusual but important stop in the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs, largely because of what it does not have. There is no main quest, no multi-step secret, no hidden narrative payoff waiting at the end of a long process. And yet, KINO Toten plays a crucial role in shaping what Zombies would become. The most likely reason for the absence of a quest is practical rather than philosophical. KINO was originally envisioned as a finale-style DLC map for World at War Zombies, before being pushed back into Black Ops 1. By the time it resurfaced, much of the development effort was likely focused on porting the map forward, updating systems, and ensuring it functioned properly within Black Ops 1 rather than expanding its scope. In that sense, KINO exists slightly out of time. It carries the DNA of an earlier era while releasing into a game that was already moving forwards. Even without an Easter egg quest, KINO's impact is significant because it standardizes structure. RIESE introduced a progression loop that players immediately latched onto, and KINO reinforces that loop so thoroughly that it becomes the default expectation for Zombies maps going forward. You spawn into a contained starting arena, you explore outwards, you locate and activate the power, and once power is on, you work towards unlocking Pack-a-Punch through some form of spatial or mechanical interaction. The sequence becomes second nature to players, and KINO is the map that teaches it to an entire generation. For many players, KINO is their first Zombies map. It does not overwhelm with complexity. It does not demand puzzle solving. Instead, it trains instinct. Players learn what progression feels like. They learn that power is a turning point. They learn that Pack-a-Punch is the ultimate goal of setup. In doing so, KINO quietly locks in the RIESE formula as the new standard. Even without a quest, the map conditions players to expect layered progression rather than static survival. Zombies is no longer just about lasting as long as possible in a single space. It is about opening the map, restoring functionality, and accessing deeper systems. KINO also reinforces another subtle expectation. Not every map needs an elaborate Easter egg to be satisfying. Strong flow, clear progression, and a memorable atmosphere can carry an experience on their own. This matters because it gives Treyarch flexibility. They can choose when to escalate and when to consolidate. In retrospect, KINO feels like a pause, a moment where Zombies catches its breath after RIESE before taking its next major leap. It does not move the Easter egg concept forward directly, but it ensures that the foundation those Easter eggs are built on is solid, intuitive, and universally understood. That stability is what allows Ascension to push so hard in the next step. Once players are comfortable with the core structure of a Zombies map, Treyarch can afford to ask more of them, and that is exactly what happens when Easter eggs return, bigger and more demanding than ever. Ascension is the map where Zombies Easter eggs take a decisive step forward and cross into something new. Everything before this point feels like experimentation, like Treyarch gradually testing how much story and structure players are willing to engage with. Ascension is where that uncertainty fades. This is the first time an Easter egg is designed to be long, difficult, and unmistakably intentional. Even if Treyarch still referred to it internally as a side quest, the scope of what players were asked to do tells a different story. The most immediate change with Ascension is scale. The Easter egg is no longer a short sequence hidden behind the natural endpoint of the map. It is a multi-step process that unfolds over the course of an entire match. Steps must be completed across different areas, often under pressure, and with precise coordination. This is also the first Easter egg that hard requires 4 players, locking solo and smaller groups out entirely. That decision would become controversial later, but at the time it reinforced an important idea. These secrets were no longer meant to just be stumbled upon. They were meant to be solved deliberately. Ascension also introduces a design element that becomes foundational going forward, which is the presence of a guiding character embedded directly into the quest.
She's coming. The mechanism must be repaired.
Gersh, trapped within the Casimir mechanism, speaks to players throughout the Easter egg. He reacts when steps are completed correctly, offers vague guidance, and acknowledges progress. This changes how players interact with Easter eggs on a fundamental level. Instead of wondering whether something worked, the game now tells you, albeit indirectly. This feedback loop creates momentum and gives the quest a sense of direction that previous maps lacked. For the first time, an Easter egg feels like a conversation between the player and map, rather than a one-sided act of discovery. The announcer still exists, but Gersh provides a counterpoint. He is a victim rather than just a manipulator, and his presence reframes the story. The Aether is no longer just a mysterious force. It is something that traps, corrupts, and distorts people. Ascension uses its Easter egg to deepen the cosmology of zombies rather than simply adding more lore. Fragments. The reward for completing Ascension's Easter egg is also a milestone, even if it did not age particularly well. Players receive an extended death machine, marking the first time an Easter egg completion provides a direct gameplay advantage rather than a purely narrative payoff. In theory, this is a logical step. In practice, it reveals a flaw in how players actually approach zombies. Most teams would complete the final steps while holding a crawler to stay safe. By the time the next round began, much of the death machine's duration was already wasted. This moment becomes a quiet but important lesson for Treyarch. Zombies players value permanence. Temporary rewards do not align well with the slow, methodical nature of Easter egg solving. This realization would heavily influence how future quests were designed and rewarded. Ascension also subtly reshapes the community's relationship with the zombies. Solving this Easter egg at launch was not only a personal achievement, it was a collective effort. The complexity of the steps encouraged theory crafting, collaboration, and shared discovery. The Easter egg hunt itself began to dominate the conversation around new map releases. The act of solving became content. Even with its flaws, Ascension represents a clear philosophical shift. Easter eggs are no longer side curiosities layered on top of survival. They are now large-scale undertakings that demand planning, communication, and time. The mode has quietly moved away from pure endurance and towards intentional progression. Trick may not have fully realized it yet, but Ascension is the point where Zombies begins to expect players to finish something rather than simply last as long as possible. And once that expectation exists, it becomes impossible to walk back. That expectation would be refined and improved almost immediately with the next map.
Walks among us.
Call of the Dead feels like a direct response to the lessons learned from Ascension. Where Ascension pushed ambition and complexity, Call of the Dead focuses on refinement. It asks a simple question: if Easter eggs are going to demand this much effort, what should players actually get in return? The answer is permanence. Completing Call of the Dead's Easter egg results in changes that persist beyond the current match. Killing George Romero now unlocks the Wunderwaffe, permanently altering his drop table, replacing the death machine with a far more useful reward. Richtofen players receive the Golden Rod, an item that carries forward into future maps. These rewards respects players' time. They acknowledge that solving a complex quest should have lasting impact. This is a crucial step in the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs. The game begins to recognize that quests are part of a larger progression, not isolated challenges. Players are no longer just completing an Easter egg for bragging rights or story clarity. They are unlocking advantages that shape future experiences. Call of the Dead also addresses one of Ascension's most criticized design choices: accessibility. Instead of a single 4-player locked Easter egg, this map introduces 2 distinct versions, one for solo players and one for cooperative. Each has its own achievement, and the co-op version only requires 2 players. This opens the door for a much larger portion of the community to engage with the story content without forcing artificial constraints. Narratively, Call of the Dead continues to push Easter eggs forward as connective tissue between maps. At the end of the quest, the original crew teleports away, and players hear ambient jungle sounds echoing in the distance.
All in good time, my clever Denshin. All in good time.
This is one of the first deliberate teasers of a future location delivered through an Easter egg. The other probably being the rocket launch Easter egg on KINO de Toten teasing Ascension, as well as the future maps on the wooden board in RIESE. The story no longer resets with each map. It moves forward. This forward momentum changes how players think about zombies. Easter eggs are no longer isolated mysteries. They are chapters. Completing one creates anticipation for the next. The hunt extends beyond the current map and into speculation about what comes after. Call of the Dead represents maturity. It keeps the scale introduced by Ascension, but grounds it in player-friendly design. It rewards effort with permanence, expands access, and strengthens narrative continuity. By the time players finished this Easter egg, it was clear that Zombies' quests were no longer experiments. They were now a core pillar of the mode. And with that foundation firmly in place, Trick was ready to refine the formula further, pushing replayability and payoff even more with Shangri-La.
We have arrived. This is the place we're supposed to be. Oh, and we need to turn on the power.
Shangri-La arrives at a moment where the Zombies Easter egg formula is largely established. Ascension proves that large-scale quests could exist, and Call of the Dead showed how to make them more rewarding and accessible. Shangri-La does not attempt to radically change that foundation. Instead, it focuses on refinement, replayability, and reinforcing the idea that Easter eggs are meant to be engaged with repeatedly rather than treated as one-time accomplishments. Structurally, Shangri-La's Easter egg feels familiar. It is multi-step. It requires coordination, and it ties directly into the map's central mechanics. But the key difference is how it treats completion. Rather than offering a single permanent unlock that applies forever, Shangri-La allows players to repeat the Easter egg multiple times within the same match. Each completion grants a single player access to the focusing stone, which in turn provides permanent perks for the remainder of the game. This design choice subtly shifts player motivation. The Easter egg is no longer something you finish and then ignore. It becomes part of your long-term strategy. Players who master the quest gain a tangible advantage that directly impacts how long they can survive. Mastery and replayability are now linked. Shangri-La also reinforces the idea that Easter eggs should feel integrated into the map's identity. The quest is tied closely to the environment, the eclipse mechanic, and the overall theme of ancient power and cyclical time. While the narrative implications are not as explosive as previous maps, the sense of cohesion is strong. The Easter egg feels like it belongs here rather than being layered on top. At this stage in Zombies' evolution, that cohesion matters. Players have come to expect that the Easter egg reflects the map's tone and mechanics. Shangri-La delivers on that expectation without trying to escalate the story further. In many ways, it feels like Treyarch consolidating what they have learned before, attempting something bigger. And that bigger step arrives immediately after.
Oh, this must be the place where they bake all the apple pies.
Moon represents the culmination of the original Zombies' Easter egg philosophy. Everything Treyarch experimented on with across World at War and Black Ops 1 converges here into a quest that is larger, more dramatic, and more consequential than anything that came before it. From the moment players set foot on Moon, the scale feels different. The environment is surreal and hostile in new ways. The low gravity changes how players move. The threat of decompression adds constant tension. Even before the Easter egg begins, the map signals that this is a place where the rules are different. The quest itself reflects that ambition. The steps are complex and intertwined with core mechanics, but what truly sets Moon apart is how it treats narrative progression. For the first time, a Zombies Easter egg has a clear midpoint that feels like an ending. When Richtofen swaps bodies with Samantha inside of the MPD, the announcer changes, the Zombies' eye color shifts, and an achievement unlocks. In any previous map, this would have been the conclusion. Here, it is only the beginning. This moment is crucial because it directly involves the player in a permanent narrative shift. The Richtofen player is now inhabited by Samantha's soul. The voice guiding the game changes. The world feels altered. The eyes shift from yellow to blue. The story does not simply advance around you, it advances through you. The second half of the Easter egg escalates both mechanically and narratively. More steps, higher stakes, greater coordination required, and finally, an ending that redefines the scope of the zombie story entirely. The destruction of the Earth is not a background event or a forced cutscene. It is the result of player action. The consequences are enormous, and they are impossible to ignore, all absorbed from your in-game perspective. Moon also redefines what an Easter egg ending can be. It does not wrap things up neatly. It ends on a cliffhanger. The story is left in chaos with no immediate resolution. This choice fundamentally changes how players think about Zombies' narratives. Easter eggs are no longer self-contained arcs, they are chapters in an ongoing saga. In retrospect, Moon feels like the natural endpoint of the Black Ops 1 era. It takes the subtlety of early maps, the structure of Ascension, the permanence of Call of the Dead, and the replayability of Shangri-La, and pushes them all to their logical extreme. There is nowhere else to go within that framework without changing the rules, and that is exactly what Treyarch chooses to do next. With Black Ops 2, where the philosophy shifts. Rather than escalating scale again, the focus moves towards player choice, branching outcomes, and the idea that Easter eggs can represent conflicting perspectives rather than a single canonical path. This shift begins with Transit, and it marks the start of a very different era for Zombies quests.
Repairing this location should take no time at all for Marlton, dun dun dun, engineer of destiny.
Transit marks the first major philosophical shift in how Zombies' Easter eggs are designed. After Moon, Trek had reached the ceiling of the Black Ops 1 quest structure. The story had escalated to an almost absurd scale, and the idea of simply making the next Easter egg bigger was no longer sustainable. Instead of escalation, Black Ops 2 experiments with divergence. For the first time, players are asked to choose. Transit introduces two mutually exclusive Easter eggs, one aligned with Ludwig Maxis and one aligned with Richtofen. Both exist within the same map, both require discovery, and both present conflicting outcomes. Once players complete one path, the story does not end. The other path still exists, unsolved, inviting continued investigation. This fundamentally changes how the community engages with Easter eggs. Solving is no longer about reaching a single answer, it is about uncovering all possible answers. This design aligns perfectly with how the Zombies community had evolved by this point. Easter egg hunting had become an event. Players collaborated across forums, YouTube and live streams, sharing findings and debating interpretations. TRANZIT leans into that energy by ensuring that no single solution satisfies the entire mystery. Completion breeds more questions rather than closure. Mechanically, TRANZIT's Easter eggs are complex and often unintuitive, reflecting the experimental nature of the map itself. The open world structure, the bus system, and the fog all work against clarity. This friction makes solving the Easter eggs feel arduous, sometimes frustrating, but also deeply communal. Progress is slow, information is fragmented, no one solves everything alone. Narratively, the choice between Ludwig Maxis and Richthofen reframes the story as a conflict of ideologies rather than a linear plot. Each side presents a different vision for the future, and the game refuses to immediately tell players which one is correct. This ambiguity fuels discussion and speculation, reinforcing the idea that Easter eggs are now the primary way Zombies tells its story. TRANZIT also reflects a growing awareness from Treyarch that Easter eggs are no longer optional curiosities. They are now the focal point of a map's lifecycle. Players expect them, they anticipate them, and they are willing to spend weeks tearing maps apart to understand them. TRANZIT designs around that expectation, even if the execution proves divisive. RIESE continues the dual Easter egg structure introduced in TRANZIT, but it also exposes the cracks in that approach. On paper, the idea remains strong: 2 opposing quests, 2 outcomes, continued narrative ambiguity. In practice, the map struggles to support that ambition. The Easter eggs in RIESE follow a similar structure to TRANZIT, with Maxis and Richthofen once again offering competing objectives. However, the steps feel more rigid and less inspired, and the vertical layout of the map often works against clarity and flow. Progression feels less intuitive, and the sense of discovery that defined earlier quests is diminished. This highlights an important lesson in the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs. Complexity alone does not guarantee engagement. When quests become too opaque or mechanically awkward, they risk alienating players rather than inviting them in. RIESE feels like Treyarch trying to keep pace with an idea that's outgrown its initial implementation. Community reaction reflects this tension. While the dual path concept remains compelling, enthusiasm begins to wane. Solving the Easter eggs feels more like obligation rather than exploration. The hunt continues, but the excitement is muted. Despite its shortcomings, RIESE plays an important role in the broader evolution of Zombies. It represents the moment where Trey begins to recognize the limitations of branching quests without strong narrative framing or satisfying payoffs. The idea itself is not abandoned, but it becomes clear that it needs refinement. Zombies is at a crossroads. The mode has grown beyond a simple survival, but its identity feels unstable. Players are invested, but divided. The next map would need to re-establish confidence, not by adding more complexity, but by redefining what a Zombies Easter egg is meant to feel like. That redefinition arrives with Mob of the Dead.
What the fuck is going on? Where is everybody?
Mob of the Dead arrives at a moment where Zombies desperately needs clarity. TRANZIT and RIESE pushed experimentation, player choice, and large-scale ideas. But they also left many players feeling disconnected. The mode had grown complex, yet unfocused. Easter eggs were harder to pass, harder to complete, and harder to care about emotionally. Mob of the Dead does not try to outdo those maps in size or complexity. Instead, it commits fully to a singular vision of what a Zombies quest should be, and in doing so, it fundamentally reshapes the future of the mode. From the start, Mob of the Dead feels different. The setting is grounded, grim, and immediately understandable. Alcatraz Island is a real place with a clear identity, and the map leans into that heavily. You are not dropped into an abstract facility or an apocalyptic wasteland. You are trapped in a prison, playing as criminals who are already dead. That clarity matters, because it allows the Easter egg to function as a story rather than a puzzle box. For the first time, the narrative is not hidden behind vague audio logs or implied details. It is front and center. The characters speak constantly about their situation, their past, and their relationships to one another. The Easter egg does not exist alongside the story. It is the story. Every major step reinforces the themes of guilt, punishment, and cycles of violence. Even the map's core mechanics, like Afterlife mode, are tied directly to this narrative framing. This is also where flow becomes a defining design principle for the zombies quests. In Mob of the Dead, players are almost always moving towards something meaningful. Collecting plane parts is not a side task. It is how you reach Pack-a-Punch. Building the plane is not busy work. It is progression. The Easter egg steps are woven so tightly into the map structure that engaging with the quest feels natural rather than optional. You are rarely standing around waiting for the game to let you continue. Another major evolution here is the introduction of a true win condition. Completing the Mob of the Dead Easter egg ends the story. There is a conclusion, a revelation, a final choice. The cycle is exposed, and the characters are confronted with the truth of their own existence. This alone is revolutionary for zombies. For years, survival had been the only endpoint. Now, finishing the quest feels like finishing a narrative arc. Mob of the Dead also reflects significant behind-the-scenes changes. The map is directed by Jason Blundell, with several members of the campaign team stepping into Zombies' development. That influence is immediately visible. The storytelling is cinematic. The pacing is deliberate. The Easter egg is structured like a 3-act narrative rather than a collection of obscure steps. This is not accidental. It represents a philosophical shift in how Zombies content is designed. Quality of life improvements reinforce that shift. The buildable system is streamlined, allowing players to carry multiple parts and reducing tedious backtracking. Friction is intentionally removed so that players can focus on decision making and execution rather than memorization. These changes may seem small, but they drastically improve how it feels to engage with a quest over a long session. Community response reflects how impactful this map was. Mob of the Dead restores confidence. It shows that zombies can evolve without losing its identity. Easter eggs no longer need to be obtuse to be engaging. They can be clear, thematic, and emotionally resonant. Many players look back on this moment as the beginning of a golden age, not because the map suddenly became easier, but because they became more intentional. Mob of the Dead proves that Zombies Quest can tell a story while still rewarding mastery and discovery. It does not abandon complexity, but it gives that complexity purpose. And once that template exists, it becomes impossible to ignore. The maps that follow would build on this foundation in different ways. Some would expand it, others would try to balance it with older ideas, but none of them could return to the aimless ambiguity of the earlier era. The next step would be to reconcile Mob of the Dead's focused storytelling with the branching, long-term narrative Black Ops 2 had already committed to. That reconciliation arrives with Buried. Buried arrives in a strange position. It comes after Mob of the Dead, a map that redefined what Zombies Easter eggs could be, but it belongs to the Victor storyline that began with Transit and RIESE. As a result, Buried feels caught between two identities. It is clearly an attempt to correct the problems of Black Ops 2's earlier Victus maps, but it cannot fully escape the design philosophy that created them in the first place. On the surface, Buried is more welcoming than its predecessors. The layout is clearer, the tone is lighter, and the map is packed with mechanics designed to reduce frustration. Aether can open paths, move obstacles, and assist with tasks. Buildables are easier to manage. The overall experience feels smoother and more playful. In many ways, Buried is Treyarch acknowledging that Transit and RIESE ask too much patience from players and offering a more approachable alternative. The Easter eggs reflect this same philosophy. Once again, players are presented with two opposing paths aligned with Maxis and Richtofen. This time, however, the structure of both quests is far more cinematic. similar. Rather than wildly different sequences, the two paths mirror each other closely, suggesting that Treyarch had already identified how inefficient and confusing truly divergent quests could be. This makes Buried's Easter eggs easier to understand, easier to complete, and easier to discuss. Buried also introduces the first true super Easter egg in Zombies. By completing all of the Victis Easter eggs on the same side, players can activate an endgame scenario using the endgame button. This adds a layer of long-term progression that encourages players to revisit the earlier maps, coordinate with friends, and commit to a particular narrative alignment. It is a smart idea, and it succeeds in giving the Victis storyline a sense of cohesion that it previously lacked. However, despite these improvements, Buried still feels like a step backwards in the broader evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs. The quests are more functional, but they lack the narrative focus and emotional weight that Mob of the Dead introduced. The story exists, but it does not drive the experience. The Easter eggs feel like objectives to complete rather than stories to inhabit. This contrast is especially noticeable because of where Buried sits in the release order. Players had already seen what Zombies could be when a map committed fully to a singular narrative vision. Returning to the Victis structure, even in its most refined form, highlights its limitations. Choice remains central, but the consequences feel abstract. The story advances, but it does not resolve. Buried is not a failure. In fact, it is arguably the best execution of the Victis formula, but it also represents the end of that approach. The improvements it makes are real, yet they feel incremental rather than transformative. It becomes clear that Zombies needs a new default, one that builds on Mob of the Dead rather than circling back to earlier ideas. That new default arrives immediately after. Origins is where Zombies hits a reset button, just like the name suggests. While Mob of the Dead proved that a focused, narrative-driven Easter egg could work, Origins takes that philosophy and applies it to the main storyline itself. This is not a side story or a stylistic experiment. This is the foundation for everything that follows. From this point forward, Origins defines what a map is expected to be. One of the most important changes Origins introduces is how completely the Easter egg is integrated into the core experience. The quest is no longer something you opt into after mastering the map. It is the spine of the map. Major systems and upgrades are locked behind quest progression. Building and upgrading the elemental stats is not optional side content. It is essential to do basically anything. The Maxis drone, G-strikes, and other powerful tools are earned through deliberate engagement with the map's deeper mechanics. This integration fundamentally changes player behavior. Instead of asking whether they want to do the Easter egg, players are encouraged to ask how efficiently they can do it. Progression and mastery becomes intertwined. Learning the quest is learning the map. Origins also dramatically increases the amount of side content available. Smaller Easter eggs and mini quests are scattered throughout the map, each offering practical rewards. This creates a layered experience. Players can focus on the main quest, chase specific upgrades, or simply survive using the tools they have unlocked. Depth becomes a defining feature. The complexity of Origins is intentional, and it is divisive. The map demands time, planning, and repetition. There is a significant upfront learning curve. For casual players, this can feel overwhelming. For dedicated players, it is deeply addictive. Mastery feels earned rather than given. Each successful run feels like a demonstration of knowledge rather than luck. Narratively, Origins also serves as a reset. The map reframes the story, introduces new versions of the familiar characters, and establishes a new baseline for the Aether narrative. This is beyond a continuation. It is a recontextualization. Players are told implicitly and explicitly that what came before is being reshaped. Most importantly, Origins proves that Mob of the Dead's design philosophy can scale. A Zombie's quest can be cinematic, mechanically rich, and deeply integrated without sacrificing challenge. The Easter egg is no longer just the story, it is the experience. From this point on, Zombies will be built around this expectation. Maps will be judged by just how well they integrate quests, how meaningful their upgrades feel, and how satisfying their endings are. The reset is complete. The new default is set. With Origins, Zombies does more than evolve, it commits. From this point forward, fully animated CGI ending cutscenes are to be expected. Origins also previews the first, technically, final boss fight of the game as well, when you have to survive in the crazy place. The narrative is front and center just as it was in Mob of the Dead, with Samantha constantly talking to you throughout the map even if you are just normally playing. You cannot escape the main quest. It is everywhere, bold and bright, and that commitment carries us directly into Black Ops 3, where this formula is expanded, refined, and pushed to its limits.
You bear the mark. You are cursed. You must ease your hand, Kingstone.
I don't think this is a dream.
Shadows of Evil is the first map to fully inherit the legacy of Origins without compromise. This is no longer a transitional experiment or a hybrid of old and new ideas. This is Treyarch committing to a clear identity for zombies moving forward. One where the Easter egg is cinematic, mechanically central, and inseparable from the map's identity. From the moment Shadows of Evil begins, it is obvious that this is a different kind of experience. The map is dense, stylized, and dripping with personality. The characters are sharply defined, the setting is theatrical, and the tone is deliberately noir. Just like Mob of the Dead, the story is not hidden away. It is present in dialogue, cutscenes, and moment-to-moment gameplay. The Easter egg does not exist in the background. It is the narrative engine driving everything forward. Structurally, Shadows of Evil refines the Origins approach. The quest is layered into progression, with rituals, upgrades, and unlocks that feel like natural extensions of the world. Each character is given focused attention through specific quest segments, reinforcing the idea that zombie stories are now character-driven rather than purely mythological. This creates a rhythm to the Easter egg, where each section feels distinct but cohesive. The introduction of a boss encounter at the end of a quest marks another important evolution. While the Shadowman boss fight is relatively simple compared to what would come later, the idea itself is transformative. Zombies' Easter eggs now end with confrontation. This is a sense of climax rather than quiet completion. The story builds towards something tangible, something that must be overcome. Shadows of Evil does make a misstep though, because you do need to be in a 4-player game in order to complete it due to the final shock step. This was always a mistake since Ascension, which they course corrected with Call of the Dead, but then fell back on with pretty much all of the subsequent quests until Origins, requiring multiplayer play. However, Origins was different because you were able to complete it solo, albeit it would be a lot more difficult, but I believe Trek never actually intended Origins to be played solo, but it became a massive success with people grinding it out solo and being able to have the luxury of doing so, which is something they would strive for with all maps going forward. But for some weird reason they chose to go back on this with Shadows of Evil, making it very unique from all of the maps that were to come. And clearly a mistake since they never gated it behind multiplayer play ever again since then. Even though the boss itself does not fully live up to the Shadowman's narrative presence, the pattern is established. Quests will end with spectacle. The Easter egg is no longer just about solving steps, it is about surviving a final test. Shadows of Evil sets the tone for Black Ops 3 as a whole. It signals that the era of subtlety is over. Zombies is now confident in its storytelling, and Easter eggs are the primary delivery system.
Fragile alliance. Hold steady.
The EISENDRACHE is where the Black Ops 3 formula truly finds its footing. It takes everything Shadows of Evil established and expands it, refining the structure, the pacing, and the payoff. If Origins set the new standard, the EISENDRACHE proves that the standard can be polished into something widely beloved. The return of the elemental wonder weapons feels familiar from Origins, but the execution is smoother and more deliberate. Building and upgrading the bows is intuitive while still demanding mastery. Each path feels distinct, and each reward feels powerful. These upgrades are not optional flourishes, they are tools designed to prepare players for what comes next. The next step is the boss fight. The Keeper boss encounter at the end of the EISENDRACHE is longer, harder, and more mechanically demanding than anything zombies had attempted before. For the first time, failure at the very end means losing everything. There are no checkpoints, no safety nets. This is a bold design choice, and initially, it almost feels unfair, but it works. The intensity of the fight transforms the Easter egg from a puzzle into an endurance test. Completing the quest feels like an accomplishment rather than a checklist item. The risk makes the reward meaningful. From this point on, boss fights are no longer novelties, they are expected, and they become one of the defining features of Zombies' quests. Like I said before, this quest can also be done solo or with any other number of players. This cements how they would be integrated in the future too. The EISENDRACHE cements the idea that Zombies' Easter eggs are meant to challenge even experienced players. Mastery is reward, but it must be earned under pressure.
I'm sorry. I don't speak Japanese.
ZETSUBOU no SHIMA is where boss fights stop being escalation for its own sake and become a structural requirement for the quest itself. After the EISENDRACHE proved that players were willing to risk everything on a difficult finale, ZETSUBOU no SHIMA takes a different approach. Instead of saving its major encounter for the end, it embeds a boss fight directly into the core progression of the Easter egg. The Spider Queen is not optional. Defeating her is mandatory, as she drops a critical component required to continue the quest. This is an important shift. The boss encounter is no longer a climactic test reserved for the finale. It is now a gate. Progress is impossible without overcoming it. This design choice fundamentally changes how players approach Zombies quests. Boss fights are no longer something you prepare for once everything else is complete. They become obstacles that must be handled mid-run, often before players feel fully equipped or comfortable. This reinforces the idea that Easter eggs are meant to pressure players, forcing them to engage with the map systems earlier and more deliberately. ZETSUBOU no SHIMA leans heavily into preparation and environmental mastery. Power, water systems, plant growth, and resource management all feed into quest progression. The Easter egg demands patience and familiarity, and the required spider boss fight serves as a checkpoint that tests whether the team is truly ready to continue. You cannot brute force your way through it without understanding the map. While ZETSUBOU no SHIMA is often remembered as slower and more demanding than the other Black Ops 3 maps, its contribution to the evolution of Easter eggs is significant. It normalizes the idea that boss encounters are not just spectacles, but mechanical necessities. From here on out, Zombies quests are comfortable forcing players into high-risk scenarios well before the ending. In many ways, ZETSUBOU no SHIMA represents the formula settling into place. The structure established by Shadows of Evil and EISENDRACHE remains intact, but the expectations are sharper. Engagement is no longer optional. If you want to see the story through, you must prove you can survive its most dangerous moments along the way. Narratively, there's a shift as well, where post-ending cutscene we have a tangent to the Alcatraz Island, bringing back the blood vials that now appear on the characters' models. It's a subtle little clue, showing that completing these quests can add little nods to the future of the story indirectly, without being plastered so front and center. This also helps to loop back Mob of the Dead to the overarching story. This makes the escalation in the next map feel natural rather than excessive. By the time KROVI demands multiple boss encounters in succession, players have already been conditioned to accept that difficulty and danger are now baked into the DNA of Zombies' Easter eggs.
Curse you, dragon! Hey! Other soldiers! Identify yourself!
KROVI takes that comfort and pushes it towards excess. Everything about this map is built to feel intense. The setting is hostile, the enemies are aggressive, the quest is relentless.
We can disarm it, Alex. Help me.
Yeah!
Cut the wire exactly when I say, not before.
Just
Green
like
wire.
goggling
In
balls.
3, 2, 1.
The Easter egg follows the established pattern, but its defining feature is escalation. Instead of one climactic boss fight, KROVI delivers two back-to-back. First the dragon, then the mech. This is not subtle, it is spectacle driven by design. At this point in the evolution of Zombies' Easter eggs, escalation has become part of identity. Each map is expected to push a little further, hit harder, and test players more severely. KROVI embraces that expectation fully. The result is a quest that feels exhausting in the best way possible. Completing it is an endurance trial that reinforces the idea that Zombies quests are the ultimate expression of player skill. Revelations is the final map of the Black Ops 3 Aether storyline, and it approaches its Easter eggs from a different angle. Rather than pushing the formula forward, it spreads outwards. The map is a collage of past locations, mechanics, and ideas, and its Easter egg reflects that philosophy. The quest itself does not introduce major new mechanics. The boss fight reuses the Shadow Man concept from Shadows of Evil. In some ways, this feels like a step backwards, especially given what came before. The ending lacks the same sense of escalation and finality. However, Revelations compensates with breadth. The map is packed with side quests, activities, and optional content. There is always something to do, something to chase, something to optimize. The Easter egg becomes one piece of a much larger playground. It is also worth noting that Revelations was developed under significant time constraints. Leaked developer materials suggest that the original scope of the quest was far larger than what ultimately shipped. Understanding that context reframes some of its shortcomings. I have discussed these core concepts in more detail in previous videos linked on screen and in the description. Revelations does not redefine zombies as Easter eggs. Instead, it closes a chapter. By the time Black Ops 3 ends, the formula is fully formed. Cinematic quests, integrated progression, boss fights as finales, depth layered on top of depth. The evolution that began with hidden music in NACHT UNTOTEN has reached its most elaborate form. And that's why Treyarch tried to do something different with Revelations, with a weird rock step, etc. They very deliberately created a very drawn out Easter egg hunt, because it was the closing chapter of the Aether saga. I mean, it literally says the end at the end of the ending cutscene, even though we knew we were going to go to the Broken Cycle next. It very much was marketed as the end of zombies. And so they wanted the hunt to be as prolonged as possible. And whilst many people criticize the hunt for this reason, I actually think it was a smart choice from Treyarch, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's good for us to get at least one map like this to see how the community would react, and I think it was timed perfectly with Revelations being the closing chapter of the Aether saga and its cycle. It wouldn't have worked with another map, but a 10-day hunt is something completely unheard of, and it literally had people watching live streams hunting it, getting hundreds of thousands of views. That to me suggests success. All eyes were on the hunt. People may think the hunt is annoying in retrospect with how random the steps were, but like I said, it got eyes on the mode. It got people invested, and no other hunt has ever been anything like it, and it will never be anything like it again. So whilst the hunt itself I wouldn't say is an evolution, it's just different, one that I don't ever think should be replicated. I think it served its purpose for this specific scenario. And from here, everything changes again. Because the systems, assumptions, and expectations built during this era would soon be challenged by new engines, new mechanics, and a very different approach to storytelling. The Black Ops 4 era and the rise of the Dark Aether saga would force Zombies Easter eggs to adapt once more. Modern Call of Duty Zombies Easter eggs are far different than they were in the earlier entries, for a large list of reasons. Many of these changes are controversial, but is that justified? Have Easter eggs actually gotten worse? Or are things a bit more complicated and complex than that? And how about people saying that Black Ops 7's Easter eggs are more like the classical ones? And what does a classical feeling Easter egg even really mean? Most importantly, what does the future of Easter eggs look like? By the end of Black Ops 3, Zombies Easter eggs had reached a strange but undeniable point of completion. The system that began with hidden radios and ambient music had become formalized into a predictable arc. Intro cutscene, multi-step quest, escalating challenges, boss fight, outro cutscene. The exact details varied, but the underlying structure no longer did. For many players, this consistency felt reassuring. For Treyarch, it posed a problem. When a system becomes that legible, innovation stops being addictive. You cannot simply layer more complexity on top forever. Black Ops 3 already pushed Escalation to its limits through stacked mechanics, mandatory boss fights, and increasingly dense quest logic. GOROD, KROVI, and Revelations are important here, not because they failed, but because they demonstrated how narrow the remaining design space had become. They were still great experiences to be had, but they were increasingly variations on a solved problem. Black Ops 4 enters development with that reality in mind. The goal was no longer to redefine what a Zombies Easter egg is. That work had already been done. Instead, the focus shifts towards diversification and presentation. Rather than trying to outdo the Black Ops 3 formula, Treyarch tries to fracture it. Different quests for different audiences, different tones, different levels of friction, different relationships between gameplay, story, and difficulty. This is where the idea of de-evolution or devolution becomes tempting, and also misleading. Black Ops 4 does not strip complexity away because Treyarch ran out of ideas. It redistributes complexity because the old structure could no longer carry new meaning on its own. That intent shows up immediately in how the game is structured. 4 launch maps, 2 storylines, Chaos and Aether Aether running in parallel. This is not only a narrative decision, it is a design one. By splitting attention, Treyarch gives itself permission to experiment without forcing every map to satisfy every expectation the community has built up over a decade. Across the game as a whole, there are several systematic changes worth acknowledging up front. Boss fights are more mechanically readable and less reliant on raw damage checks. Cinematic presentation is emphasized far more heavily, with mid-quest animations, scripted sequences, and environmental storytelling playing a larger role than abstract logic puzzles. And most controversially, Black Ops 4 introduces an on-screen Easter egg tracker that shows main quest progression, the current step, and a vague hint. That tracker is often treated as a betrayal of Zombies' roots, but in context it reads more like an admission. The classic Easter egg structure had become so dependent on community documentation that discovery was no longer happening inside the game at all. The tracker does not remove difficulty, it removes opacity. And while that trade-off was not universally welcomed, it was an honest response to how players were already engaging with quests. Rather than judging Black Ops 4 by how closely it adheres to past ideals, it makes more sense to evaluate it by what each map tries to do differently. Clarity as an onboarding tool. 9 is the most approachable main quest Black Ops 4 offers, and that is entirely by design. The map communicates its identity clearly from the first round. The layout is symmetrical. Visual language is strong. Enemy behavior reinforces spatial awareness rather than punishing it. 9 is meant to be readable in a way few previous Zombies maps ever were. The Easter egg reflects that philosophy. Steps flow naturally from one space to the next, often reinforcing mechanics the player has already been taught through normal play. You are rarely asked to do something arbitrary or disconnected from the environment. When progression happens, it happens where the player already is, rather than forcing obscure backtracking or pixel hunting outside of one step, where it is essentially teaching the player to look for that kind of step in other quests. The Easter egg tracker plays an important role here, but it is not doing all of the work. Even without it, the quest is structured around intuitive cause and effect. Perform a ritual, survive a challenge, be directed forwards through spectacle rather than abstraction. The boss fight continues this pattern. It is visually impressive, mechanically clear, and forgiving enough to encourage repeated attempts rather than punishing failure. 9 is often dismissed as too easy, but that criticism misses its function. This quest exists to lower the barrier of entry without abandoning the idea of a main quest entirely. After years of escalation, Zombies needed a map that demonstrated you could still deliver narrative closure and spectacle without demanding encyclopedic knowledge. In that sense, 9 is less about innovation and more about stabilization. It reintroduces the idea that Easter eggs can be completed organically, through engagement with the map rather than mastery over it. Complexity without familiarity. Voyage of Despair sits almost directly opposite to 9 in terms of experience. Where 9 emphasizes clarity and flow, Voyage leans into density and spatial tension. The map itself is claustrophobic, vertically layered, and easy to get lost in, even for experienced players. That complexity bleeds directly into the main quest. The Chaos storyline allows Treyarch to experiment without the weight of Aether's expectations, and Voyage uses that freedom to test how far cinematic ambition can carry a quest that is mechanically demanding. Steps are less intuitive, positioning matters more, and coordination is frequently required under pressure. This is not a quest that explains itself through play as cleanly as 9 does. However, Voyage also demonstrates one of Black Ops 4's biggest systematic improvements, which is boss fight design. The encounter against the Eye of Odin is mechanically distinct, visually striking, and clearly staged as a climax. Unlike many earlier boss fights, success here is less about raw firepower and more about understanding patterns and managing space. Community response to Voyage of Despair reflects a recurring tension in Black Ops 4. Players appreciated the ambition but struggled with how hostile the experience felt. The quest is memorable, but not necessarily inviting. In earlier eras, that kind of difficulty would have been framed as prestige. In Black Ops 4, it feels more like one option among many, and that shift in framing matters. Voyage of Despair is not meant to replace 9, it is meant to coexist with it. High concept at a cost. Blood of the Dead is where Black Ops 4's design philosophy becomes the most divisive. This is a reimagining of Mob of the Dead, one of the most beloved maps in Zombies' history. That alone ensures scrutiny. But Blood of the Dead does not attempt to recreate Mob of the Dead structure or pacing. Instead, it reinterprets it through a symbolic lens. The Easter egg is built around the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Each major step is meant to represent one of these phases, both narratively and mechanically, as well as serving as a mirror to Mob of the Dead's quest and ending. This is ambitious and at times genuinely inspired. It also meant that some steps ended up feeling much more hidden. Forcing the Warden to slam into the wall of his own house after knifing it is a great example of a step that may have felt at home in Black Ops 2, but feels out of place here. The problem is not necessarily the design intent, it is friction. Many steps are punishingly strict, poorly communicated, or hostile to experimentation. And none can be better represented by poor communication than the Morse code step, which for years people were just brute forcing it when the game actually lets you know what the code is, but it's in the distance of the map and people literally didn't find it until years and years after the map was even out, rendering it entirely pointless when 99% of the people who had done the quest up until that point had to do it in a much more arduous way. The hints may as well have not even been there. Some people like this, that there's dormant secrets lying there to be found at any point in Zombies. And for some things, like, for example, the impossible Easter egg, it makes sense. But I think for the main quest, you don't want to have something so integral to how you actually complete it be so abstract and undiscoverable. Regardless, unlike Mob of the Dead, where progression felt like an extension of the map's natural flow, Blood of the Dead's quest often feels imposed on top of it. Failure can be abrupt and demoralizing, especially given the length of the setup required to retry later steps. Blood of the Dead is also where Black Ops 4's increased emphasis on cinematic storytelling becomes a double-edged sword. The payoff is emotionally heavy and narratively significant, but reaching it demands patience that many players simply did not have. This is an important moment in the broader argument. Blood of the Dead is not evidence that Treyarch forgot how to design Easter eggs, it is evidence that they were willing to prioritize thematic expression over accessibility, even at the risk of alienation. That is not de-evolution, it is experimentation under pressure. And that's ignoring all of the blue screen issues that plagued Black Ops 4 at release as well, which I'm about to come on to. Blood of the Dead was particularly hit hard. I remember doing this at launch, I think I crashed like 15 times before I was able to complete it. It was crazy. That left a sour taste in a lot of people's minds, but is less so about the quality of the main quests themselves and is more about a general game issue. Regardless, let's continue. Absence as a statement, classified as an odd but revealing entry into Black Ops 4's lineup because it largely refuses to participate in the Easter egg arms race at all. There is no traditional multi-step main quest, there is no boss fight, there is no guided progression or cinematic finale triggered through puzzle solving. Instead, the map hides its narrative payoff behind a simple but brutal requirement: reach round 150. At first glance, this feels regressive, even flippant. After years of increasingly elaborate quests, looking story behind a high round challenge seems disconnected from where Zombies had been heading. But in context, classified reads as a deliberate counterpoint. It reasserts survival as a valid endpoint. The map asks a very old question in a very modern landscape: how long can you last? After all, there were theories back in the day on, say, KINO the Toten, for example, about a Hitler boss fight on, I don't know, round 115 or something, I don't know, some high round basically, so it was rooted in zombie speculation from back in the day. The problem is not the idea, it is the environment it exists in. They wanted to reward high round players, but it didn't work because Black Ops 4, like I said earlier, launched with stability issues that made legitimate high round attempts unreliable and impossible for a long time. Crashes, bugs, and performance problems undermined the legitimacy of the challenge. At launch, getting to round 150 was literally impossible. You would crash way earlier on, which caused my friends and I to actually attempt a mutations glitch to be able to get to this round first to showcase the cutscene to the community, because it was about a month after launch and the storyline community, which is obviously a very big portion of the community, much like the high round community, was at a complete standpoint, and dialogue and audio had leaked from the cutscene but missing the full context based off the visuals. Rumours had leaked about getting to at high round to actually get the cutscene, and really it was the only way to get it at the time, and I don't regret it at all. I regret the aftermath of it, but due to Treyarch launching such a buggy game, it meant that the game was completely plagued with controversy regarding its main quest, and particularly classified cutscene, which was completely unavoidable. As soon as the game shipped in such a buggy state and they took so long to fix it, it was inevitable that someone, even if I didn't do it, would have gotten to this round eventually and the same controversy would have arisen. What might have felt like a throwback test of endurance instead felt inaccessible, and for many players unfair. Even once the game fully fixed all of the bug issues and the blue screens, it was still an unfair challenge that most people just could not be bothered to attempt. Classified exposes a larger tension that runs through Black Ops 4. Treyarch wanted to broaden what counted as meaningful engagement, so the surrounding systems were no longer built to support older forms of validation cleanly. High rounds had once been the purest expression of zombies mastery. Here, they struggled to coexist with modern expectations around accessibility and reliability. Density without restraint. Dead of the Night swings hard in the opposite direction. Where Classified strips structure away, Dead of the Night piles it on. This is one of the most mechanically dense quests Treyarch has ever designed. Parts overlap, systems stack, knowledge checks are frequent. Preparation matters at every stage. The quest demands coordination and foresight, especially during the boss fight, which is mechanically demanding and punishing of mistakes. Unlike earlier boss encounters that leaned on spectacle and damage output, this one emphasizes role clarity and timing. Teams that do not communicate struggle. Teams that do often feel genuinely tested. For experienced players, Dead of the Night offers depth and replayability. There is satisfaction in mastering its many layers. For others, the sheer amount of required knowledge creates a wall. The map does not ease players into its complexity. It expects commitment. What makes Dead of the Night interesting in the broader evolution is how little it compromises. This quest exists for a very specific audience. Treyarch clearly recognized that not every map needed to serve as an entry point. Some could exist as challenges meant to be conquered rather than sampled. This is a recurring theme in Black Ops 4. Instead of converging towards a single ideal Easter egg, the game allows extremes to coexist. That freedom produces variety, but it also fractures the player base. Enjoyment becomes increasingly dependent on which maps align with your tolerance for friction. Cinematic momentum. Ancient Evil is where Black Ops 4's focus on presentation pays off most cleanly. The quest is streamlined compared to Dead of the Night, but far from trivial. Steps are structured to maintain momentum, often pushing players forward through spectacle rather than halting progress for extended puzzle solving. What stands out here is the use of small cinematic moments throughout the quest. Mini cutscenes, scripted animations, and environmental transitions give the impression of constant forward motion. The Easter egg feels paced, almost choreographed. At times, it resembles a campaign mission more than a traditional zombies quest. The boss fight reinforces this sense of scale. It is visually imposing and mechanically layered without being overwhelming. Players are given clear feedback and room to recover, which encourages learning rather than discouraging retries. Ancient Evil highlights one of Treyarch's key realizations by this point. Story delivery no longer needed to be confined to the beginning and end of a quest. Narrative could unfold during play, reinforcing progression rather than interrupting it. This approach reduces the reliance on obscure steps to carry meaning. For many players, this made Ancient Evil feel like the most confident Chaos map. It balances challenge, clarity, and spectacle in a way that feels intentional rather than reactive. Nostalgia as structure. Alpha Omega shifts focus again, this time leaning heavily on memory. Set in a reimagined Newtown, the map draws deeply from the classic Aether iconography. Familiar locations, long-forgotten characters, and legacy story threads resurface throughout the quest. Structurally, the Easter egg mirrors older Aether quests, more closely than anything else in Black Ops 4. It is long, multifaceted, and layered with narrative callbacks. A guest character guides the crew, echoing earlier designs lines where external voices framed progression. The complexity here feels purposeful. Alpha Omega functions as a bridge between eras. It reassures longtime players that the identity they associate with zombies has not been abandoned. At the same time, it integrates Black Ops 4's newer systems, including clearer feedback and more structured boss encounters. Community response reflects the duality. For some, Alpha Omega feels like a welcome return. For others, it highlights how heavily zombies had begun to rely on nostalgia to generate emotional weight. Either way, the map underscores the pressure Treyarch was under to satisfy conflicting expectations simultaneously. Ending through attrition. Tag to Toten closes the Aether storyline, and its Easter egg reflects a clear shift in priorities. Instead of introducing a new villain or elaborate final boss, the quest emphasizes endurance and positioning. Players complete a series of challenges introduced through Pablo's Trials, an early version of a system that would later become central in Black Ops Cold War. The finale abandons the traditional boss fight entirely. Players are forced into increasingly hostile holdouts, culminating in a final stand where survival becomes almost impossible. The threat comes from standard enemies, the very zombies the mode is named after, rather than a singular antagonist. This choice feels deliberate. The Aether story ends the same way it began, through pressure, through attrition, through being overwhelmed. The spectacle is quieter, but the intent is clear. Closure comes from exhaustion rather than triumph. Mechanically, this approach strips away escalation and replaces it with inevitability. Narratively, it reinforces the themes of sacrifice and finality that had been building for years. By the end of Tag to Toten, the classic Easter egg formula has been stretched, fragmented, and reframed in nearly every direction possible. Some experiments landed cleanly, others alienated portions of the community. Taken together, Black Ops 4 does not represent decline so much as saturation. The space for novelty within the old structure had narrowed to the point where radical redistribution was the only viable option. And that context matters deeply when we move into the Dark Aether era, where Zombies does not attempt to preserve the old framework at all, but instead rebuilds quests around accessibility, guidance, and long-term sustainability. When Black Ops Cold War launched, Zombies entered a very different development reality. Much of the team had changed. The engine had changed. The surrounding Call of Duty ecosystem had changed. Perhaps most importantly, the audience had changed. Zombies was no longer a niche mode living on the margins of multiplayer. It was positioned as a long-term pillar meant to be approachable, replayable, and sustainable across seasons. That shift made the classic Easter egg framework difficult to justify in its existing form. By the end of Black Ops 4, quests had become dense, front-loaded with required knowledge, and heavily dependent on external guides. For experienced players, that was part of the appeal. For new or returning players, it was a wall. Cold War's approach reflects a clear conclusion Treyarch had reached internally. Quests could no longer assume deep community literacy as a baseline. They needed to function inside the game itself, without requiring prior research. That decision reshapes everything that follows. Guided discovery. The Maschine serves as a deliberate entry point. The map is familiar in layout and tone, echoing NACHT UNTOTEN while layering modern systems on top. The Easter egg follows that same philosophy. It introduces guided progression through radio handlers who explain context, react to events, and nudge players forward. This narrative framing solves multiple problems at once. With operators replacing a fixed crew, there is no longer space for quest-specific character dialogue. Handlers fill that gap while reinforcing the militarized tone that Black Ops Cold War leans into. At the same time, they provide clarity. Players are rarely left wondering whether something worked or what matters next. Objective markers and an on-screen objective HUD formalize this guidance further. Steps are clearly labeled, locations are highlighted, failure states are forgiving. Even when the game briefly stops giving explicit direction, the structure remains easy to follow. The result is one of the most accessible main quests Zombies has ever had. Completion rates rise dramatically. Players who had never attempted an Easter egg before suddenly find themselves finishing one. This was also at a time where Warzone was taking off, so a bunch of those free-to-play players from Warzone jumped into the mode to try it out, as well as a load of multiplayer fans came rushing over to the mode because of the new systems that were more accessible and streamlined for them, as well as some systems such as the score streaks coming over from multiplayer as well. This was the audience that Treyarch were perfectly trying to attract with the new style of Easter eggs from Die Maschine onwards. The cost of that accessibility is subtle rather than dramatic. Discovery shifts away from experimentation and towards execution. The mystery that once defined Zombies' quest is reduced, replaced by confidence that progress is always visible. Die Maschine establishes the new baseline. Quests are no longer hunts, they are essentially campaign missions. Guided, spelled out, replayable, heavily accessible, and mass appealing, with Die Maschine still being the most played main quest ever in Zombies' history. Structure over surprise. Firebase Z builds directly on Die Maschine's framework. The quest follows the same guided structure, with handlers providing context and objectives presented clearly through the HUD. Where the map differentiates itself is in how it integrates its mechanics. Defense waves replace traditional dog rounds, forcing players to protect specific areas every 10 rounds. This change influences quest pacing. Players are already accustomed to rotating around the map under pressure, so quest steps fit naturally into that rhythm. The Easter egg itself does not introduce major structural innovations. Instead, it reinforces consistency. Steps are varied and playful, but rarely opaque. The boss encounter continues Black Ops Cold War's trend of clarity over chaos. Mechanics are readable, mistakes are survivable, with one of the easiest boss fights of all time. This again was intentional. They wanted this fight to be highly accessible, with harder boss fights to come once more people become accustomed to them. Community reception reflects this stability. Firebase Z is often remembered as solid rather than spectacular, often forgotten. That response aligns with its role. It is not trying to redefine zombies, it is trying to make the new framework feel reliable. Quests without a map. Outbreak represents the most radical shift in Zombies' structure since Transit. The mode abandons round-based progression in favour of large-scale environments shared across multiple regions. At launch, it ships without a main quest. When the first Outbreak quest eventually arrives, its design reveals how deeply systems now drive quest structure. Because players can initiate the quest at different points in the run, every map must support the opening trigger. After that point, the game forces a specific region to regain control over pacing and narrative. This hybrid approach is functional but constrained. Flexibility early gives way to rigidity later. The quest feels modular rather than authored. The second Outbreak quest leans even further into this idea. It is short, focused, and largely exists to set up future content. Narrative delivery takes priority over mechanical challenge. Outbreak demonstrates a growing comfort with releasing experiences before they are complete. Seasonal editions become the norm. Quests are no longer tied to a map's launch identity. Their content beats delivered over time. That lesson carries consequences that Treyarch will reap in a future game, Vanguard. Whilst the second Outbreak quest is very easy, as well as its boss fight, the first Outbreak quest is much more difficult, with its boss fight, Legion, being one of the hardest boss fights in Zombies history, at least on launch. A massive contrast to how easy Firebase Z's was. This shows that Treyarch were trying to balance a mixture of hard and easy boss fights. However, the community complained en masse that it was way too hard and they nerfed it immensely. Which is ironic considering everyone was complaining they were too easy before, so clearly Treyarch were struggling with the balancing at the time. Or at least maybe the community was just not ready yet for such a hard boss fight because of how easy the previous ones were. Probably the Legion boss fight would have better served as a DLC 4 boss fight for the game. The finale, and they should have slowly eased into that instead of having it so early on, which was definitely a mistake on their part. Because no boss fight in the game to follow would be as hard as it. Reintroducing Threat. Toten arrives amid growing criticism that Cold War's quests feel too guided and too safe. In response, Treyarch leans back towards classic Zombies' tones and pressure. Several steps reintroduce risk. Failing certain objectives carry lethal consequences. Secret areas reward exploration without immediately explaining themselves. The atmosphere leans darker, reinforcing the idea of literal Nazi zombies, once the namesake of the mode, almost emerging from the dark ether. At the same time, the underlying systems remain unchanged. Objective markers persist. Handlers continue to guide progression. The tension comes from moment-to-moment danger rather than structural opacity. Reception at launch is mixed. Some players feel the quest sits uncomfortably between eras. Over time, sentiment improves. In hindsight, Toten is often viewed as Cold War's strongest map alongside Die Maschine because it balances accessibility with genuine threat more effectively than its predecessors. Narrative closure first. Forsaken closes Cold War Zombies with a quest that prioritizes story resolution over mechanical experimentation. The steps are straightforward. The boss fight is serviceable rather than transformative. Which, like I said, they really should have had a boss fight on par with the Legion fight here. The Forsaken is meant to be such a formidable threat, and he's not too difficult at all. I know he suppresses powers, of course, but regardless. What carries the experience is context. This mirrors a pattern that began with Tag to Toten. Endings shift away from introducing new systems and towards resolving themes. Small gameplay tweaks appear, often resembling early visions of mechanics that will be expanded on in later titles. Forsaken functions as a narrative handoff. It wraps the Dark Aether arc while quietly preparing the ground for whatever comes next. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when. By the end of Cold War, the transformation is complete. Zombies' Easter eggs have been rebuilt around clarity, guidance, and seasonal longevity. The hunt-driven structure of earlier eras no longer defines the experience. That transition sets the stage for one of the most turbulent experiments Zombies has ever attempted. Vanguard represents the most aggressive attempt to rethink zombies since the mode began. Rather than iterating on Cold War structure, Drake rebuilt zombies around a roguelike inspired loop. Objectives unlock areas. Progression is randomized. Runs are meant to feel modular and reactive rather than planned. It took some elements from Outbreak and merged it with round-based kind of and some other weird elements. It's strange that they took such a big risk with this mode and made it so different to what round-based is when it was reportedly made in such a short time period, in about 4 months or so, as Treyarch were reportedly forced to help create a co-op mode for Sledgehammer Games' game, which was also made in a short period of time, which is why they didn't have one ready. I guess they figured there's no way we can top any previous round-based experiences with such a short dev cycle, so let's try and be experimental in this short time and get used to the new Modern Warfare engine. That choice immediately reshapes what an Easter egg can be. Classic quests rely on stable geography, predictable pacing, and long-term setup. Vanguard removes or weakens all three. The mode asks players to adapt moment to moment, which leaves very little room for authored multi-step narratives. Structure without payoff. Anfang launches without a main quest, or any side quest, or anything really going on for that matter. At the time, this decision feels especially damaging because of the lesson learned during Outbreak. Players had already experienced content launching incomplete, and tolerance for that approach had worn thin. Clearly Treyarch couldn't do anything else though with such a short dev time. When a quest is eventually added, it feels constrained by the mode's limitations. The steps are brief and disconnected. A small Shi No Numa segment appears, offering a glimpse of classic Zombies flow, then immediately pulls players back into the broader experience. The quest ends almost as soon as it begins. There is no escalation, no mechanical climax, no sense of endurance or mastery. For many players, this confirms a fear that the new mode cannot support meaningful quests at all. Nostalgia worsens the impact. Returning to a fragment of Shi No Numa without access to the full map reminds players of a structure they prefer and cannot fully engage with here. Terminology as distance. Terra Maledicta reinforces those concerns. The quest is again brief and again framed differently in marketing, referred to as a story event rather than a main quest. The distinction may have been internal shorthand, but to players it signals lowered expectations. Mechanically, the quest resolves unfinished business from Dirt and Fang rather than presenting something new. Progression feels obligatory rather than exploratory. This is the moment where confidence in Vanguard's direction collapses. The roguelike structure shows little room for refinement, and the quest design feels boxed in by systems that were never meant to support it. A retreat to stability. Shi No Numa's return marks a clear pivot. Classic round-based survival comes back. Clearly never the initial intention, but Trek ditched plans due to how hated Vanguard was, and probably there was only about 5 people playing. With it comes a more traditional main quest. The Easter egg is still shorter than quests from earlier eras, but it has recognisable structure, setup, progression, a boss fight, narrative payoff. It feels coherent. Because of what surrounds it, Shi No Numa is often remembered as Vanguard's peak. That memory says less about the quest itself and more about the desire for stability. When the foundational loop returns, quests regain their footing. At the same time, this moment quietly signals the end of Vanguard's central experiment. The roguelike direction is effectively abandoned rather than refined. This decision will reflect on zombies going forward, as it more and more emphasizes loadouts and arcade design for random elements or rogue-like systems. Scale without space. The Archon closes Vanguard zombies with another traditional quest layered onto a reused map. Terra Maledicta is back, this time with a green filter slapped on it. Oh, it's brand new now. The boss fight against Cortex is the largest Trek had attempted visually, emphasizing scale and spectacle. Trek even said this is where pretty much all of the development time went into for this map, and is why it's just a reused map. They clearly didn't have a big development team for Vanguard, so they wanted this boss fight to be memorable. The problem is context. Reusing Terra Maledicta undercuts momentum. Familiarity replaces anticipation. The quest functions, but it does not re-establish trust. And whilst the boss fight is spectacular, it ends abruptly with Cortex simply falling to the bottom of the depths of the dark ether. There is no cutscene, there is no tie-in to Black Ops Cold War with Zykov like we thought. It just ends, leaving only questions. By this point, players are already looking past Vanguard and towards whatever comes next. Modern Warfare Zombies is an important chapter in this conversation precisely because it almost completely abandons the language of Easter eggs without abandoning their function. On the surface, Modern Warfare Zombies looks like another experiment in open world zombies, drawing obvious lineage from Outbreak mixed with the DMZ. But structurally and philosophically, it represents a much more decisive shift. This is the point where Trek stops trying to retrofit the classic quest idea into new systems and instead builds a parallel structure that accomplishes similar goals through different means. Modern Warfare Zombies is designed around shared space. Multiple squads occupy the same large map simultaneously, each operating independently, completing contracts, looting gear, and choosing how deep into danger they are willing to go. Difficulty is no longer governed by rounds, but by regions. Risk is spatial rather than temporal. This alone breaks several assumptions that classic Easter eggs rely on. There is no controlled pacing. There is no guaranteed build-up. There is no clean moment where the game can reasonably expect all players to be ready for a singular, escalating sequence of steps. Within that framework, traditional Easter egg quests would struggle to exist at all. Instead, Modern Warfare Zombies introduces missions. These missions culminate in act finales, which serve the same narrative role Easter eggs once did. They provide structure, escalation, and closure. The difference is how explicitly everything is communicated. From the moment a mission begins, the players know exactly what they are doing and why. Objectives are clearly stated, locations are marked, progress is tracked openly. When the finale is reached, the game pulls the squad out of the shared world and places them into a private instance. This is a critical design choice. It allows Treyarch to reintroduce authored pacing, controlled encounters, and cinematic storytelling without disrupting the open world loop that defines the mode. These instance finales resemble classic Easter eggs more than they might initially appear. Players enter a bespoke environment. They complete a series of escalating objectives. Combat intensity rises, a narrative beat resolves through a cutscene. Functionally, this is the same arc Zombies has followed since Moon. What changes is how the player arrives there. The sense of discovery that wants to find Easter eggs is largely absent. There is no hunt for hidden triggers. There is no uncertainty about whether something worked. Progression is earned through participation rather than investigation. This is not an accident. Modern Warfare Zombies is designed to be legible first and foremost. It assumes a player base that may be engaging with the zombies casually, alongside other modes, without dedicating hours to deciphering opaque logic. That clarity comes with trade-offs. For long-time Zombies players, Modern Warfare Zombies missions rarely generate the same communal excitement as a traditional Easter egg hunt. There is nothing to solve collectively. There are no secrets to decode. Context is experienced as intended, in the order it is presented, with little room for interpretation. Once a mission is completed, there is little incentive to revisit it beyond efficiency or rewards. Modern Warfare Zombies achieves something earlier experiments struggled with. Narrative delivery is stronger than it has ever been outside of cutscene-driven finales. Characters are clearly defined. Stakes are communicated directly. The Dark Aether story continues in a way that feels coherent rather than fragmented. For players who care primarily about story comprehension rather than mystique, this is the most accessible Zombies narrative has ever been, aside from maybe Cold War. Whilst main quests were replaced with missions, Modern Warfare Zombies did offer something for more traditional quest fans with its sigil missions in post-launch, and even featured a really cool Easter egg to fight the Red Worm. This boss fight was on a scale Zombies had never seen before, and could even be fought with the whole match of players, 24, making a spectacle that is unlike anything from prior Treyarch quests, with teamwork unlike anything either. Its post-launch missions into the Dark Aether continued the generic mission campaign formula, with minuscule boss fights, until the final one, which is its standout, fighting the entity that is once again a highlight in Modern Warfare Zombies, and one of the biggest scale boss fights in Zombies' history, showing scale that can only be achieved in these open world missions, a limitation of round-based zombies. Modern Warfare Zombies also reinforces a trend that began in Black Ops Cold War, and accelerated through Vanguard. Zombies content no longer needs to ship complete on day one. Acts, missions, and finales can be added in over time. Now that Zombies has fully shifted to a live service model and free DLC. This seasonal structure aligns well with live service expectations, but it further distances Zombies from the idea of a singular, self-contained map experience. Easter eggs used to define a map's identity. In Modern Warfare Zombies, identity is spread across the mode as a whole. In the context of the video's thesis, Modern Warfare Zombies represents a logical endpoint for one branch of Zombies' evolution. When the classic Easter egg system could no longer scale cleanly, Treyarch explored alternatives that preserved narrative payoff and progression without relying on obscurity. Modern Warfare Zombies is not a failure to understand what Easter eggs were, it is an acknowledgement that the conditions that allowed them to flourish no longer exist in every mode. What Modern Warfare Zombies ultimately reveals is that Easter eggs were never just about puzzles. They were about giving invested players a sense of direction, purpose, and resolution within chaos. Modern Warfare Zombies provides those same things through structure rather than secrecy. That realization sets the stage for the next major shift. With Black Ops 6, Treyarch does not abandon this clarity, but they begin searching for a way to bring challenge, tension, and player-driven discovery back into the equation without losing the accessibility they fought to establish. That's where the real course correction begins. By the time that Black Ops 6 releases, Treyarch is no longer reacting blindly to criticism. They are responding to a decade of accumulated pressure. Black Ops 4 exposed the ceiling of the classic Easter egg formula. Black Ops Cold War rebuilt quests around accessibility and long-term sustainability. Vanguard showed how fragile quests become when the foundational loop collapses. Modern Warfare Zombies proved that narrative structure could survive without mystery, but also demonstrated what gets lost when discovery disappears entirely. Black Ops 6 is the first game that openly tries to reconcile all of that at once. Rather than committing to a single philosophy, Black Ops 6 introduces optionality as a core design pillar. This is a quiet but fundamental shift. Earlier games tried to decide what zombies should be. Black Ops 6 accepts that zombies means different things to different players and designs around that reality. Main quests return with real mechanical teeth. Boss fights regain scale and spectacle. Preparation matters again. Failure is possible, sometimes likely. At the same time, the game introduces directed modes that exist alongside the traditional experience. These modes preserve clarity and guidance without forcing those constraints onto everyone. This layered approach changes how quests are perceived. Difficulty is no longer synonymous with obscurity. Accessibility is no longer synonymous with simplicity. Players choose how much friction they want before the match even begins. That choice alone resolves the tension that had defined the Dark Aether era. Black Ops Cold War had to assume approachability at all times. Black Ops 6 no longer does. Quest rewards reinforce that philosophy. Completing a main quest provides tangible, immediate benefits. Ground loot spawns including higher tier weapons and Pack-a-Punch crystals. Everyone receives a perkaholic. These rewards respect time investment without trivializing the challenge. They also encourage replayability, especially in public or mixed skill groups where incentives matter more than narrative closure. Early completion bonuses, like exclusive calling cards, might seem minor, but they echo an older Zombies tradition. Recognition matters, even when the reward is cosmetic. The act of earning something first reinforces the idea that mastery has value. Directed mode extends that logic further. By separating guided experiences from unguided ones, Trek removes the need to design every quest around the lowest common denominator. New players can learn structure and rhythm without pressure. Experienced players can engage with the hunt on their own terms. Importantly, neither group invalidates the other. Boss fights in Black Ops 6 reflect a renewed confidence. They are bombastic again, large arenas, clear phases, escalating threats. These encounters draw from lessons learned during Black Ops 3. While avoiding some of the excess that made later quests feel exhausting rather than climactic, the emphasis is less on stacking mechanics and more on readable danger. Community response reflects this balance. Discussions shift away from whether quests are too easy or too hard and towards how they feel to execute. That distinction matters. It suggests that Treyarch has regained control over pacing rather than chasing extremes. Black Ops 7, still ongoing, does not radically change this foundation. That is why it is often described as a continuation rather than a reinvention, with it releasing back-to-back to Black Ops 6. The systems introduced in Black Ops 6 are expanded rather than replaced. It's merely an extension. The philosophy remains intact. Curse mode Easter eggs are one of the clearest expressions of that expansion. These variants introduce altered rule sets and unexpected twists without redefining the core quest. They create space for experimentation that does not threaten the main experience. While some of the classic features are back, such as the old point system, failure here feels playful rather than punishing. The same goes for LTMs throughout Black Ops 6 and 7, adding interesting new twists to gameplay that allow us to re-experience these quests in new ways. Which, back in Black Ops Cold War, the limited LTMs it did have did not allow us to redo the quest like when they had Cranked in that game. But Cranked in Black Ops 6 and 7 can allow you to do the quest in a whole new way. Relic hunts push in a different direction. They exist quietly. They are not always explained. They reward observation and persistence rather than explicit instruction. This brings back a trace of the old Zombies atmosphere, where not everything important announces itself. The difference now is that this obscurity is optional. It exists alongside guidance, not instead of it. It keeps these hunts going for ages and a reason for people to keep on playing them, with all of the relics still not found to this date. Perhaps the most telling addition in Black Ops 7 is the option to disable objective HUD elements entirely. This is a small toggle with large implications. For years, experienced players argued that constant markers eroded tension and discovery. Trek did not remove those systems, they gave players control over them. That decision alone encapsulates where Zombies quests now stand. The mode no longer tries to enforce a single way to engage. It provides frameworks and lets players decide how much structure they want imposed. At this point, Zombies Easter eggs are no longer a monolith. They exist as a spectrum of experiences. Some are guided, some are opaque, some prioritize narrative, others prioritize mechanical mastery. They have crazy boss fights that vary massively in quality, style, and strategy from map to map. They are not predictable. None of them are required to carry the full weight of the mode on their own. This is not a return to the past. It is an acceptance that the conditions that produced earlier Easter eggs cannot be recreated wholesale. The community is larger. The audience is broader. The games are live services rather than isolated releases. What Black Ops 6 and 7 demonstrate is that stagnation was never the goal worth protecting. Preservation without adaptation would have hollowed the mode out far more effectively than experimentation ever did. Now, for the first time in years, Zombies feel structurally confident. There is room for newcomers. There is room for veterans. There is room for mystery again, even if it no longer defines everything. And that leaves the series in a surprisingly healthy place, with customization options expanding and systems becoming more modular. Future Zombies experiences are not boxed into repeating the same quest structure endlessly. They can borrow from the past without being trapped by it. Whatever comes next will likely be shaped by reboot rather than revision. but it will arrive with something earlier eras lacked, a clear understanding of why zombies Easter eggs look the way they do today, and how to let them grow without losing what made them matter in the first place. But what are your thoughts? Are you excited for what comes next post Black Ops 7? Do you agree with my takes on these Easter eggs? And do you think Treyarch is learning the right lessons? Let me know all of your thoughts down below, but without further ado, if you haven't seen part 1 already, it will be linked below. But there has been the entire evolution of the zombies Easter eggs, all the way from World at War to Black Ops 7. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already for latest and greatest Call of Duty news information. So anyways, thanks for watching, and bye. To conclude this video, I want to shout out the fact that I finally decided to make a Patreon and Cameo account, both of which will be linked below if you want to help support the channel. On Patreon, you can sign up for the lowest tier of just $1.50 a month to get exclusive access for my Discord, where we can discuss zombies lore, trivia, or whatever you desire. A place where you lot, my community, can better connect. Your names will also appear at the end of videos thanking you. For $5.50 a month, you get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive monthly Q&As. And for $16.50 a month, you again get all of that, and I will be doing exclusive lore videos, such as unpacking niche parts of the Treyarch documents I've been breaking down on my channel that don't as much suit a main channel video. For the highest tier, only for those with the ability to and who really want to help out the channel, you get special bonuses I've yet to determine and verbal shoutouts at the end of every video. Over on Cameo, I can do funny videos reading lines from zombies, memes like how do we tell him, birthday wishes for friends or family, or whatever else you desire, practically anything. Of course, none of this is necessary, just watching and enjoying the videos helps me immensely and I greatly appreciate it. However, I think it's about time I start setting up additional revenue streams because Zombies' popularity is tumultuous and always goes through ups and downs. As I'm sure you've lately seen on the channel, viewership is down a lot, we go through big highs when new games release, but then during these drought periods, I need more income stability so I don't have to worry as much about it and I can focus more on improving the quality of the content. My highest quality videos are not always the ones that best please YouTube algorithms, so instead, this way I can produce my best work knowing I don't have to think as much about how well the content's going to perform. So if you'd like to support me on Patreon for exclusive content or would like a simple Cameo message, you can do so to further support me via the links below, but only if you can afford it and you actually want to help me. Don't feel like you are forced to, don't worry, I'll survive. It would just help relieve some of the pressure during inconsistent periods on the channel, so I don't have to solely rely on AdSense revenue and still maintain the sheer quantity and quality of content that I put out. Obviously, I pump out literally a boatload of content, and some of these are absolutely crazy projects over hour-long videos, so it's a lot on my plate, especially when these videos don't perform particularly well. And I've not been doing many sponsorships lately to help supplement revenue either, so it would greatly help. Thank you for any generous person once again who does kindly support the channel. It means the absolute world and will really help keep this boat afloat.